Have you ever prayed so hard you thought you'd hear a heavenly drum roll only to be met with the spiritual equivalent of elevator music? You sit there thinking, "Hello, God? Are you on mute?" If you've been there, welcome to the club. We've got jackets and snacks. But here's the thing. What if that silence wasn't a glitch in the divine system? What if it was actually the message? Today in this video, we're going to walk straight into that awkward, uncomfortable, holy quiet and discover why it's not the end of your story, it's actually the start of the best chapter. When God feels silent, the first instinct is usually panic. Did I miss a step? Did I do something wrong? Did he leave? But silence in scripture is rarely about abandonment. It's often about alignment. Think about Elijah in 1 Kings 19. The guy has just called down fire from heaven, defeated hundreds of false prophets, and you'd think he'd be riding that spiritual high. Instead, he's hiding in a cave, burned out, and begging God to just take him home. God tells him to stand on the mountain because his presence is about to pass by. Then comes a windstorm so fierce it tears through the mountains, but God's not in the wind. Then an earthquake, but God's not in that either. Then a fire, still not him. And finally, a gentle whisper. That's where God is. A whisper so soft you have to lean in. No special effects, no surround sound. Just the kind of voice you can only hear if you're really, really close. This is the frustrating beauty of divine silence. Sometimes God waits until the world is still enough for you to notice him. It's a little like trying to have a deep conversation at a rock concert. You can't hear anything unless you step outside into the quiet. God knows when the noise has to die down so his whisper won't get drowned out. Another moment like this shows up in 1 Samuel 3, where the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Translation: God wasn't handing out daily prophetic memos. Samuel, still a boy, is sleeping in the temple when he hears his name called. He runs to Eli, the priest, thinking it's him. This happens 3 times before Eli realizes it's God speaking and tells Samuel, "Next time say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" Can you imagine Samuel's face when he realizes it's the Almighty and not his half-asleep mentor? The kid learned one of the greatest spiritual skills in the quiet, how to recognize God's voice. That doesn't happen in a rush. And then there's David in Psalm 22. My God, why have you forsaken me? I cry by day, but you do not answer." That's not poetic metaphor, that's raw, gut-level honesty. But here's what's interesting. If you keep reading David's Psalms, you notice he doesn't camp out in despair. By Psalm 62, he's writing, "For God alone my soul waits in silence, my hope is from him." That's a man who's learned that God's apparent quiet isn't absence, it's an invitation to deeper trust. So why would God choose silence? One reason is timing. Habakkuk 2:3 says, "For the vision awaits an appointed time. Though it linger, wait for it, it will certainly come." God's answers are often like packages marked "deliver at the right moment," and he's the only one with the tracking number. Another reason is training. We're quick to assume that hearing God is like tuning into a radio station. Find the right frequency, get the message. But it's not about mechanical reception, it's about relational recognition. Samuel didn't just learn that God was speaking, he learned how to be still enough to listen. And then there's God's will. Sometimes the silence is actually his answer, not a no to punish you, but a not now, or trust me, because he sees what's ahead. Paul's thorn in the flesh, he asked 3 times for it to be removed. God said no, but in that no, he gave Paul something better. My grace is sufficient for you. Now here's where it gets personal. Silence is not an excuse to do nothing. It's an invitation to do something different. Remember how the Israelites kept retelling the stories of God's past deliverance in the wilderness? That was them actively remembering his faithfulness when they couldn't see the next miracle yet. Waiting in silence doesn't mean sitting on the couch staring at the ceiling. It means leaning into prayer, staying rooted in scripture, and creating space for God to speak in ways you might not expect. It's like cooking a stew. You don't keep lifting the lid every 10 seconds or it'll never cook. You let it simmer, trusting the heat to do its work. And yes, silence can be awkward. We fill gaps in conversation because they make us uncomfortable. But sometimes God is like the friend who isn't afraid of the pause. The friend who sits with you in the stillness because the presence itself is the comfort. You don't need him to talk all the time to know he's there. If you're walking through one of these quiet seasons, you're living in the middle of a story, and it's a good one. Every compelling story has tension, and silence is one of the most powerful forms of it. Think about Joseph in prison. Think about the disciples on the Saturday between the crucifixion and resurrection. The silence doesn't mean the story is over, it means something is happening off stage. And when that curtain comes up, the impact will be even greater because of the waiting. The beauty is that you can tell your silent season story in a way that encourages others. Start with honesty. I prayed, and God didn't answer the way I wanted. Describe the emotions: confusion, frustration, hope hanging by a thread. Then show the shift, the moment you realized the silence was shaping you. Maybe it was a sudden peace. Maybe it was a scripture that seemed to leap off the page. Maybe it was looking back months later and realizing God had been working all along. Those details matter because they let your listener feel the journey with you. Don't be afraid to use metaphors. Maybe your season felt like waiting for a text back from someone who's already read the message, except God isn't ghosting you. He's composing a reply so thoughtful it's going to change your life. Or maybe it felt like planting seeds in winter, not seeing a single sprout until one day the ground bursts open with green. These pictures help people understand the emotional weight of waiting. Humor belongs here too, because it's often in the waiting that we discover how impatient and human we really are. I've told friends before, I asked God for a sign and I got nothing. At this point, I'm tempted to start asking for smoke signals. Laughter breaks the tension, but it also makes the story relatable. And here's a secret about God's silence. It often says more about his presence than his absence. If he were truly absent, you wouldn't be looking for him. The longing itself is proof of the relationship. Silence can mean he's so close you don't need him to shout. It can mean he's teaching you to lean in, to trust, to remember. It can mean he's already moved pieces into place and is waiting for the exact right moment to lift the veil. So if you're in the middle of that quiet right now, here's my encouragement. Don't mistake the lack of noise for a lack of love. The God who whispered to Elijah, who called Samuel in the night, who held David's heart steady in the silence, he hasn't changed. His voice may not sound the way you expect, but it's still there, waiting for you to draw near enough to hear it. And hey, if this journey through God's silence made you smile, gave you hope, or at least convinced you he's not ghosting you, hit that like button. It's free, it's easy, and I promise it makes this channel feel way less like I'm talking to myself in my living room. Subscribe so you don't miss the next time we dig into the whispers, wonders, and occasional plot twists God writes into our stories.